Hello and welcome to the Mormon Yeshiva. This particular presentation is entitled The Made-Up Names of the Book of Mormon, Jacobugath. Again, please make note of our fair use disclaimer. Again, these video series are just for educational purposes only. So why are we entitling this particular presentation Made-Up Names? Well, for one reason, over the past few weeks I've had several emails sent to me regarding people who have left often their belief in the Book of Mormon, citing that most of the names are just made up and there are no such things as such places and those kind of things. But as sacred literature, names mean things. So I thought it would be good to take a look at the importance of these names. And specifically, I wanted to zone in on one particular, because this person mentioned it, on the name, as I've often heard it among many Mormon circles, Jacobugath. And behold, this started in 3 Nephi 9, verse 9. And behold, that great city, Jacobugath, which was inhabited by the people of King Jacob, have I caused to be burned with fire, because of their sins and their wickedness, which is above all the wickedness of the whole earth, because of their secret murders and combinations. For it was they that did destroy the peace of my people, and the government of the land. Therefore I did cause them to be burned, to destroy them from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints should not come up unto me any more against them. And behold, the city of Laman, and the city of Josh, and the city of Gad, and the city of Kishkumen, have I caused to be burned with fire, and the inhabitants thereof, because of their wickedness in casting out the prophets, and stoning those in whom I did send to declare unto them concerning their wickedness and their abominations. And because they did cast them all out, that there were none righteous among them, I did send down fire and destroy them, that their wickedness and their abominations might be hid from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints, whom I have sent among them, might not cry unto me from the ground against them. Again, 3 Nephi 9. So in this particular narrative, we see here at the mentioning of this term, Jacobugath, and those additional cities, including Jacobugath, you'll notice that he mentions 5 specific cities that were consumed by fire in relation to this particular mention. So in this case, you have Jacobugath, Laman, Josh, Gad, and Kishkumen. He then goes on, and later in the section, in this particular full discourse, even though it's divided into chapters, it's in the book, it's one complete book. He goes on in 3 Nephi 10 and gives us an interesting prophetic marker. And now, whoso readeth, let him understand. He that hath the scriptures, let him search them, and see, and behold, if all these deaths and destructions by fire, and by smoke, and by tempests, and by whirlwinds, and by the opening of the earth to receive them, and all these things are not unto the fulfilling of the prophecies of many of the holy prophets. So right here, the writer, this particular prophet writer in the Book of Mormon, he's actually telling us that if you want to understand these words that he's talking about, then we need to search the scriptures. So let's take a closer look at this name that we call Jacobugath. So what's in the name Jacobugath? Well, first off, we need to understand that the name is really not Jacobugath. What is interesting is that in the Book of Mormon, many of the names that are written out are actually phonetic Hebrew word constructs. So somebody, in a sense, is sounding out Hebrew, and they're putting words together. So in this case, what we call Jacobugath is actually Yaakov Ugot. So Yaakov meaning supplanter, heel catcher, layer of snares, who also came to be the house of Israel, or Israel himself. And then the Hebrew word ugot, meaning cakes. So what we're talking about is a city that this particular writer is terming Jacob's cakes. Now that may sound funny, because do I really think the name of this city was Jacob's Cakes? Probably not. But the writer himself is labeling this particular city that was destroyed under this particular term or phrase, Jacob's Cakes, or the Cakes of Jacob. But in this case, we want to look closely at the word ugot, because it means cakes. To understand the meaning of and the usage of the word ugot, we want to go back into the Torah, specifically the first 5 books of Moses, or sometimes among our what we call the Old Testament. But ugot meaning cakes. In this case, we go back to the place of first mention of the word ugot, and that's found in Genesis 18:6. And you're going to want to pay close attention, because the prophet writers of the Book of Mormon knew what they were writing, and the intricacy at which they wove their teaching is very important. So as we go to Genesis 18:6, note what it says. And Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the earth. Cakes, ugot. Okay, cakes baked on hot cinders. In Genesis 18, we find this place of first mention, and in this particular chapter of Genesis, Bereshit, we see a narrative taking place. In this particular chapter, Abraham sees the Lord on the plains of Mamre. 3 men approach Abraham. They give him the promise of Isaac, but then they also tell him of the judgment on the cities of the plains. In other words, these angels come to tell Abraham not only to give him a promise of his promised son Isaac, but also to give him, a foreknowledge that they're going to go pronounce judgment upon the cities of the plains. What is interesting is we often miss these underlying tales, or details, should I say, of why the Lord is mentioning this. In this case, what do cakes have to do with the cities of the plains? The first things we should note is that notice that there are 5 cities of the Nephites and 5 cities of the plains that are mentioned. In 3 Nephi, in this particular chapter, where it names out these particular 5 cities that were destroyed and consumed by fire because there were no righteous in them, we see Jacobugath, Laman, Yesh, Gad, Keshkumen. Okay? In the Torah, or the Old Testament, we see the 5 cities labeled as Sodom, Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, Bela, or sometimes known as Zoar. And so in this particular case, we notice first we should be seeing the parallels. 5 cities in the Nephites that are destroyed by fire, 5 cities of the plains. The prophet writer is trying to draw our attention by the usage of these 5 cities and their destruction by fire, and the usage of the term ugot, cakes, to lead us back to the Torah to see this aspect of the judgments that are pronounced. In the judgments on the cities of the plains, it goes on and says, And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence, and went towards Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord. And Abraham drew near and said, Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now here it goes on to this entire, almost what appears to be to some, of Abraham kind of negotiating with God on, per se, why and how he will destroy the cities of the plains. Of course, the Lord goes down and his servants go down to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they find that pretty much everything that had ever been told to them was true. And what's interesting is that right before this narrative, we have Abraham talking with the Lord. What if there's, say, 50 righteous? Would you destroy it? God says no. Say 30. What about maybe 20 and 10? And he goes, and the Lord says, as long as there's no righteous in it, as long as there are righteous people in it, I would not destroy it. But obviously, they didn't find any righteous people in it, and the only people that were let out, according to the story, was Lot and his family. So in that day, it says, then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain. And behold, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. So here we see that, very much like we sing in the Book of Mormon, the 5 cities of the Book of Mormon, the Lord sent a consuming fire upon them because there were no righteous. In this case, we also see the parallel being drawn by the prophet writers in the Book of Mormon of the destructions there, and comparing them with Sodom and Gomorrah, showing that the only person that was saved was Lot and his family because there were no righteous found. What is interesting is that we often miss the idea that ugot is connected with Passover. Specifically, it's often used in conjunction with the idea of the matzah, or the cakes, the bread of haste at Passover. So what's interesting in this Passover theme, notice what is said in Genesis 18:3-5. And said, my Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort you your hearts. After that you shall pass on. Pass on. For there they are come to your servant. And they said, so do as thou hast said. So in the very beginning of this thing, we see that the idea of Jacob's cakes, or the cakes of Jacob, being connected with the idea of a Passover theme. That there is something about the idea of ugot, or cakes, these particular cakes, being connected to both judgment and the concept of a Passover. What brings a Passover of judgment, and also what brings the judgment about? So like what saved the children of Israel? The blood of the firstborn upon the lintels, if you will, the lambs upon the lintels. And of course, we see that whole story of the Passover and the firstborn of Egypt being taken. But the concept and the picture being painted is that this is a Passover theme. We see this same connection with the word ugot with the cakes of Passover found in Exodus 12:39. Here it says, and they, meaning the children of Israel, baked unleavened cakes, ugot, of the dough which they brought forth out of Egypt. For it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt, and they could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual. So here we also see this same concept, this same keyword, ugot, being connected with the actual Passover in Exodus. But there's actually a teaching that is even more sublime, that if we follow both in the Torah and in the writings and also the prophets, we will see the usage of this word ugot and the full picture of the message God is meaning us to see. In relation to this, let's take a look at Jacobugath and Elijah, the prophet Elijah. Elijah is one of the prophets. And we saw earlier where the Lord talked about how these things were to the fulfilling of the words of the prophets. So in 1 Kings 19, it commences with an interesting story where basically Elijah was fleeing from Jezebel and had left and went into the wilderness because she was basically killing all the Lord's prophets. So it says in starting in verse 1, and Ahab told Jezebel that Eliyahu, had done, and withal how he had slain all the prophets with the sword. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under, it says here, a juniper tree. It's more like a brooming tree, one that spreads out. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. And that night, as he lay under this juniper tree, this brooming tree, as he lay and slept under the juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And behold, and he looked and beheld, there was a cake, uga, singular cake, ugot, cakes, bacon on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. And the angel of the Lord came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose, and did eat and drink, and went into the strength of that meal. Notice what it says here, 40 days and 40 nights, unto Horeb, the mount of God. The idea of 40 days and 40 nights is an ascension theme, the idea of someone ascending to the mountain of the Lord's house. So when you see that 40 days and 40 nights, whether it be with Elijah, Moses, the Messiah in the wilderness, when you see that, that is an ascension theme. It is something here is a teaching that is teaching us how to ascend the mountain of the Lord's house. And then Elijah, it says, he came thither unto a cave, and lodged there. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So here Elijah is lamenting of what's gone on. You hear that voice of lament. He's saying that the children of Israel are killing the prophets, that Jezebel and her wicked followers are literally exterminating them. And here is where we get a full picture, or a fuller picture, of the purpose of Jacobugath, specifically with Elijah. So in 1 Kings 19, 11, and 12, we get this grand picture painted for us. And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by. Again, Passover theme. And a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and broke in pieces the rock before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. See, here's the interesting thing. Notice what is being described. Just like we see with the Nephite cities, there were mountains broken. There were rocks rent in twain and cast up over cities. Cities that were destroyed by whirlwinds and earthquakes. And also, a fire, great fire. Notice it says, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. That pattern there should connect us right back to the events in the Book of Mormon, where these cities were destroyed, and specifically these 5 were consumed by fire. So let's take a look again. And behold, that great city, Jacobugath, Jacob's caves, which was inhabited by the people of King Jacob, have I caused to be burned with fire because of their sins and their wickedness, which was above all the wickedness of the whole earth. Why? Well, because of their secret murders, their combinations. For it was they that did destroy the peace of my people and the government of the land. Therefore I did cause them to be burned, to destroy them from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints should not come unto me any more against them. 3 Nephi 9:9. And notice what he says. He goes on, and behold, the city of Laman, and the city of Yesh, and the city of Gad, and the city of Keshkuman, have I caused to be burned with fire, and the inhabitants thereof, because of their wickedness in casting out the prophets. Notice, casting out the prophets, like what the people of Israel did with Queen Jezebel and her followers. They cast out the prophets and stoned those who they did sin to declare unto them concerning their wickedness and abominations. Very similar to what happened to Elijah and the prophets in the northern kingdom. They testified of the wickedness of the people, and because of that, they were hunted down and they were, literally taken out of the entire picture because they were testifying of the wickedness of the people. And he goes on, and because they did cast them out, that there were none righteous among them. Notice that he says no righteous. Think about going back to what Abraham says. What if there's 50? I would spare it. What if there's 30? What if there's 20? What if there's 10? The Lord said, if there, as long as there's righteous people in it, I would spare it. But in this case, in these cities, just like with the cities of the plains, and it says there were none righteous among them. And it says, and I did send down fire and destroy them, that their wickedness and their abominations might be hid from before my face, that the blood of the prophets, like Elijah and others, and the saints, the set apart ones, whom I have sent among them, might not cry unto me from the ground against them. 3 Nephi 9. So in the midst of all this whirlwinds and earthquakes and water coming upon cities, and that's everything that's described in chapters 9 and 10, we see this particular theme being singled out, and the particular names of the cities, and we won't go through all the meanings of all the names. We're just going to stick with the one this time. But each of these cities' names have a specific meaning. Meanings of the names will lead you to specific scriptures that we have, and it will give you additional teachings regarding not only what happened among the Nephites, what happened in the ancient times, but also the ideas of those things, sacred things, which regarding ascension and ascending to the mountain of the Lord's house. But in the midst of all this, notice like what it says, where God says to Elijah, but in none of these things which the Lord found, but in a still small voice, or what was called a voice of stillness. Well, we actually find this theme of the voice of stillness also in the Book of Mormon as a fulfillment of these prophetic teachings, both in the Torah with Abraham and among the prophets with Elijah. Notice in verse 3 of even chapter 9, verse 1, and it came to pass there was a voice heard among all the inhabitants of the earth upon the face of the land, crying. And then he goes on in 3 Nephi chapter 10 and talks about, it says, and it came to pass that all the people of the land did hear these sayings and did witness it of it. And after these sayings there was silence in the land for the space of many hours. For so great was the astonishment of the people, that they did cease lamenting and howling for the loss of their kindred which had been slain. Therefore there was silence in the land for the space of many hours. And it came to pass that there came a voice again unto the people, and all the people did hear and did witness of it, saying. And it goes on. But most important, it leads up to even a greater revelation, a third time, if you will, when this voice of the Lord was heard. And this is in 3 Nephi chapter 11, the voice of stillness. The still small voice, the voice of stillness. Verse 3. And it came to pass that while they were thus conversing one with another. Now remember, this is after all the destructions, after all the whirlwinds, the fires, the tempests, the earthquakes, the earth coming up and the cities sinking in. It says, and it came to pass that while they were thus conversing one with another, they heard a voice as if it came out of heaven. And they cast their eyes round about, for they understood not the voice which they heard. And it was not a harsh voice, neither was it a loud voice. Nevertheless, and notwithstanding it being a small voice, it did pierce them that they did hear to the center, insomuch that there was no part of their frame that it did not cause to quake. Yes, it did pierce them to the very soul, and it caused their hearts to burn. And it came to pass that they heard the voice, and they understood it not. And then in verse 5, and again the third time they did hear the voice, and did open their ears to hear it, and their eyes were towards the sound thereof, and they did look steadfastly towards heaven, from whence the sound came. And behold, the third time they did understand the voice which they heard, And it said unto them, Behold my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, in whom I have glorified my name. Hear ye him. Now, if you'll notice, not many people realize this, but in that last verse, we see an evoking of the writer here upon both the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings. So, hear ye him, the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord with all your heart, might, mind, and strength. Okay, the Shema, Deuteronomy 6. Okay, behold my beloved Son, Psalms. Okay, the writings. And in whom I am well pleased, in whom I have glorified my name, the prophet Isaiah. So he, in this one verse alone, he is evoking every legal requirement under the Torah, under Israelite law, if you will, of witnesses. He is evoking the Torah, he is evoking the writings like Psalms and others, and he's also evoking the prophets, all of which this is a fulfillment. So while I understand that there are many people that look at these strange names like Jacobugath or Jacobugath, these names are there for a reason. Now, we could even go on and extend this to, there are many other names in this section that have additional meanings that will lead you to a greater understanding of also what is being communicated here. Fortunately, we just don't have the time in this presentation to go through every single one. But just in going through this one, you can see the intricacy and how the prophet writer wove his message not only within his own writing, but connects it he connects it right back to Abraham, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as the prophet Elijah, and understanding a doctrine of ascending to the Lord's house and hearing that voice of stillness, that still small voice. All of these are intricately interwoven. So for those out there who believe that it's just a made-up text, the intricacy and the method of interweaving these particular principles according to ancient Israelite law is very apparent to many Jews who actually do take the time to read this. And you will see that the Book of Mormon is full of these intricacies, these interwoven concepts. So when we look at something and we think that it may be made up, or we don't understand why that particular is there, or it doesn't sound like something we've ever heard of, it may mean that we need to take the time and take a greater look at the words. What are they saying? What are the words composed of? Nothing was written by accident. Every word was placed for a reason. And within the words and even the numbers and even the number of times something is evoked in the Book of Mormon, each of these things have intricate meanings. And it's waiting for us to dig in, to feast on them and unlock them so that the greater doctrines of the Book of Mormon can be revealed. So in this case, I hope you'll take it in the spirit in which it was meant. So in this case, perhaps the made-up names of the Book of Mormon, like Jacobugath, are not so made up.